Okay, so welcome back to the continuation of the hormone and exercise lecture. The next hormone we're going to be talking about is growth hormone. So this is, in general, it's very important for the normal development of a child. It appears to play a very vital role in adapting to the stress of resistance exercise training. So here are some key points to a general overview of growth hormone. Growth hormone is released from the anterior pituitary gland and is released in response to signals coming from the hypothalamus. So like I said before, the hypothalamus is really controlling what the pituitary gland is going to do. So it's waiting for signals from the hypothalamus in order to tell it what to do. So the hypothalamus releases something that's called growth hormone releasing hormone. Then that goes to the anterior pituitary gland, and then the anterior pituitary gland releases growth hormone into the bloodstream itself. So growth hormone is released in a pulsatile fashion and has diurnal variations. And the greatest amount of growth hormone released is during sleep. So it is very important during an exercise, well, it's important in general, but it's very important for an exercise protocol or resistance exercise training program to get an adequate amount of sleep, because that is also when most of it is released. Growth hormone stimulates the release of other growth factors. For example, IGF-1 is extremely important, which we'll talk about next. This makes growth hormone makes an increased amount of amino acids available for us for cellular incorporation. And as a result of these two functions, tissue repair will occur, which happens in the recovery phase post-exercise. So it's extremely important during the recovery phase. And tissue repair obviously aids in muscle hypertrophy, and it also plays a role in fat metabolism. So here's what I was saying before about how the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland are intimately connected with one another. So we have the anterior pituitary gland, which is called the adenohypophysis, and then we have the posterior pituitary gland, slightly different color here, that is called the neurohypophysis. So a neurohypophysis and the posterior pituitary gland, the hypothalamus is connected with the posterior pituitary gland by nerves and nervous signals, where the anterior pituitary gland uses chemical second messengers to communicate, and it has vessels here where it communicates with the hypothalamus. So they communicate with the hypothalamus, the anterior and posterior, in each different ways. Okay. So growth hormone release, it's just that if you like that diagram, the hypothalamus releases growth hormone releasing hormone and then goes to the anterior pituitary gland, releases growth hormone into the bloodstream, and then growth hormone goes to the liver, which then the liver releases IGF-1 into the bloodstream, and then that IGF-1 goes in and is the major player with acting upon muscle, bone, and fat cells, so actually can help repair and increase hypertrophy in muscles and lay down more bone by increasing protein synthesis. So growth hormone, the main physiological roles is 1, it decreases glucose utilization, it increases protein synthesis, it increases collagen synthesis, so our support structures are enhanced, it stimulates cartilage growth, it enhances immune cell function, and increases lipolysis, so it can actually help use fat as a fuel source. So growth hormone release is affected by the type of resistance training protocol used and includes the duration and of the rest period. So like we said before, the configuration statement from before is very important with the release of growth hormone. So the number of sets, the time of rest period, and total work volume all go into play here with regards to how much growth hormone response we're going to get. So short rest periods type of workouts result in a greater serum concentration compared to long rest protocols of similar total work. So for example, in between sets, if you rest 30 seconds to a minute, you're going to have a greater growth hormone response as compared to if you had a rest period in between sets of 2 to 3 minutes in between a set with the same amount of volume or the same weight lifted. So shorter rest periods of time will actually enhance growth hormone releasing, and which we'll talk about a little bit with regards to how that is released based off of lactate and hydrogen ion buildup at some point in time. So however, it's not present if it's clear how the various molecular forms or types of GH are affected by different rest duration. We just know total serum concentrations can be affected. So growth hormone responses in women, hormone concentrations and hormone responses to exercise can actually vary with menstrual phases, and however, the mechanisms are unclear. So let's talk about growth hormone and training adaptations. It appears that growth hormone concentrations need to be measured over long periods of time between 2 and 24 hours to show whether changes occur with resistance training itself. So the area under that time curve, which includes from 2 to 24 hours, includes an array of different pulsatile effects. Like we said, it has diurnal variation, so it is pulsing out at different times of the day, tells whether changes in release have occurred. So we need some sort of baseline to compare to in someone versus when someone's exercising, and we can compare those numbers. So, high metabolic stress and hormones. So, high intensity resistance exercise, we know, based off of talking about our energy systems, that it creates an area of decreased pH, right? Because we are going through the glycolytic pathway fast. So, we are releasing lactate and we're releasing hydrogen ions. So, when we release, we have an increased amount of hydrogen ions, we have an area of decreased pH. So, an area of decreased pH, so things such as hydrogen, triggers the sympathetic nervous system peripheral mechanoreceptors, so type 3 and type A4 afferents peripherally, then send signals to the brain and says, hey, we need help. We got high metabolic stress down here, and then growth hormone is released in response to that. So now we can see how shorter rest periods as related to an increase in serum growth hormone, concentrations, because the faster we're going through the glycolytic pathway, the more lactate and hydrogen ions that are building up. The more hydrogen ions that are building up, we are becoming more acidic. The hydrogen ions then press on those peripheral mechanoreceptors, and type 3 and A4 afferents get sent up to the brain in order for us, and goes to the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland to then release growth hormone. So that's why shorter rest periods, we are not clearing lactate or hydrogen at an adequate rate. So if we had longer rest periods, our body has more time to clear that, so we're not going to have as a dramatic as a response to growth hormone. So let's talk about growth hormone and IGF-1. So growth hormone does not function independently. It works in conjunction with IGF-1. They work nicely together. And both of them together increase amino acid incorporation into the muscle cells. And what are amino acids again? Remember, those are building blocks of protein, and building blocks in protein, increases bone formation, collagen formation, muscle cell formation, and increased hypertrophy, etc. So IGF-1 is found in the liver and within the skeletal muscle tissues, and IGF-1 synthesis is growth hormone dependent. So like I said, they work hand in hand together, and it helps mediate the activity of growth hormone. So here, what happens again with the cascade, we have environmental cues, or for example, a high intensity exercise protocol. We're going to have an increased amount of hydrogen ions and decreased area of pH, which will be those type 3 A4 afferents send up signals to the brain. And then at that point in time, the anterior pituitary gland releases growth hormone into the bloodstream here. The growth hormone then goes to the liver, and then the liver then releases IGF-1, and we then go to the target tissues over here, and then we get lovely growth where we need it. So IGF-1 can take 3 to 9 hours. So it can actually take 3 to 9 hours for growth hormone to stimulate IGF-1 release, and then additional time for IGF to exert its effect on skeletal muscle. So where growth hormone release is pretty immediate during and after an exercise protocol, IGF-1 takes a lot longer than that, because we need growth hormone to circulate in the bloodstream, go to the liver, and then activate the liver to release its IGF-1 into the bloodstream. Then on top of that, it takes extra time for IGF-1 to exert its effects on skeletal muscle tissue itself. So this IGF-1 incorporates more amino acids into the skeletal muscle cells. It gives us increase in amount of contractile proteins. It helps increase fiber size, and then therefore increase strength and power. So IGF-1 is a very big player with strength and power. Okay, so we talked about the mTOR pathway quickly. The mTOR pathway is so it's called the mammalian target of rapamycin, is a protein which enhances protein synthesis when it's activated. So when this pathway is activated, we enhance protein synthesis and therefore muscle growth. This is activated when muscles are stressed. So we cause micro tears during heavy resistance exercise training. I'm talking 70% plus of your 1 rep max. Repair process will take place and aid in the development of muscle growth, and it's activated by insulin, growth hormone, and various aspects of your diet. So it's important for carbohydrates to be mixed in with that protein diet as well to activate this pathway. Okay, so when we activate this mTOR pathway, it actually increases the translation and transcription of different ribosomes, and we form new proteins. And then proteins obviously are the building blocks of life, and at that point in time we can incorporate into more muscle fibers, we can make more actin-myosin filaments, and so forth. So it's very important for us to activate that mTOR pathway and then see how IGF-1 comes onto the IGF-1 receptor, activate the P13 kinase here. We go through the mTOR pathway. mTOR pathway stimulates protein synthesis. So how mTOR pathway plays a very key role with increasing protein synthesis and therefore muscle growth. Okay, so then here's just one more slide for you to see that IGF-1 activates here. We activate this kinase. We come here, we activate mTOR, which activates these enzymes, and then we get protein synthesis, cell growth, and cytoskeleton remodeling. So very important with regards to strength and power as far as hormones go. Okay, so exercise responses to insulin-like growth factor. We have, for a multiple set heavy resistance protocol, on 3 consecutive days with and without nutritional supplementation of protein carbohydrate before, during the 1 hour recovery period. Right, so we can actually see here the significant differences when we actually do fuel properly. So we have supplementation of protein carbohydrate before, during, and 1 hour after. And we can see the release of insulin-like growth factor here on day 1, day 2, day 3, which we can see it increases as compared to the placebo. So nutritional values are just as important, and intaking adequate amount of protein and carbohydrates and stimulating the release and exerting the release within the system then. So that is this. Okay, so we'll wrap up with growth hormone and IGF-1. They play a huge role in the development of muscle growth. The mTOR pathway activation leads in an increase in protein synthesis. An increase in protein synthesis and decrease in protein breakdown or degradation leads to muscle growth. Satellite cell activation and proliferation can occur into existing muscle cells due to those micro tears and incorporate the increased fiber size. And then that acidic environment activates that growth hormone release. So during high intensity exercise training, that acidic environment can enhance growth hormone release and therefore exert IGF-1's release of IGF-1 and then impact on target tissues. High intensity exercise training can also, enhance cell swelling, and an increase in cytoskeleton tension can actually activate protein synthesis as well. So that increase in cytoskeleton tension puts pressure on the organelles, and in order to take that pressure off the organelles, the cell's protective mechanism is to activate protein synthesis pathway as well, and it's kind of protecting its own infrastructure within the cell itself. Okay, so our final video that you will go to next, we will start talking about adrenal glands and the hormones associated with the adrenal glands, and then that will wrap up our talk on hormones and its impact on strength and power and during exercise.